Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of In the Eyes of Truth. Today we have a very special guest with us, but again, all my guests are special, so but you're still a special guest. Eva Bartlett, she is a Canadian American journalist now living in Russia, having covered Donbas, amongst other things. So, Eva, you froze for a second with a smile, like, did I get something wrong?
Oh, that's probably my terrible internet. Всем привет. Thank you for having me on, Stas.
Tell us about yourself. How did you get into journalism? Was it in Canada or America, or both? And how did you wind up on this side of the world? What's your journey? Tell us your life journey. Let the people know.
Sure. It was neither Canada nor America.
Oh,
I grew up in Canada. I was born in the States,
hmm.
grew up in Canada, and in after being completely apolitical throughout my education, I was living abroad and I started becoming aware of the issue of Palestine. So that was the first major up on, and eventually decided I had to go and see for myself. So I did that in 2007.
Hmm.
Oh, my internet connection is unstable. So I'm probably, can you hear me? I
Yeah,
just
yeah, I
never,
can hear you. You slow down a little bit
okay.
once in a while, but we'll work our way through it.
I
The
have no
audience
idea why the
understands.
VPN is off, but anywho, so I spent 8 months in the West Bank in
Hmm.
2007, which was a very insightful 8 months into the nature of what Palestinians are living every single day under Israeli occupation. Just incredible. I could talk about that for hours, but eventually I was deported from there, and the next year I went by boat with a group of activists to Gaza in 2008. And I arrived there in November 2008, which was about 1.5 months before that the 2008-2009 3-week war
Hmm.
began. And so I was there during that war and was at the time I was an activist. I wasn't a journalist. I always liked writing, but I hadn't gone to journalism school or anything. But I was seeing a lot of crazy stuff that I hadn't seen before, and I was doing my best to write about it. Eventually, started being published in different publications for free. But whatever. For me, the importance was just getting the story out, what I was seeing, because it wasn't only the war. The war was brutal. It was something I'd never imagined I would see, and
Hmm.
all sorts of I was with medics in northern Gaza, so I was seeing the worst of the worst atrocities.
Right, right.
I'm seeing the bodies they were bringing back. I was in an ambulance that came under Israeli sniper fire during ceasefire hours. Um, I saw white phosphorus, the effects of white phosphorus on a family home and the
Oh, that's
family within.
nasty. That's nasty.
It was really nasty. I saw them in Al Shifa Hospital, which is the main hospital in Gaza City. But then after I followed up on their story, and it was a really tragic story, but several members of the family didn't make it. They burned to death, including an infant, and others were badly disfigured from it. Anyway, all this, as you can imagine, is profoundly impactful. And so I became very tunnel visioned on matters Palestine. I spent 3 years in Gaza,
Hmm.
from 2008 to 2010, and then 2011 to 2013. During that time, two wars, the siege, which is just absolutely devastating, and people don't really talk about that enough. It basically prevented Palestinians from being able to live in any capacity. They couldn't work, they couldn't export, they couldn't import, they couldn't farm, they couldn't fish. I mean, it is absolutely brutal. Um, During that time, the war on Syria began in early 2011.
Hmm.
And so when I left Gaza, I then went to Syria in 2014. And that was a very hard time because at that point, all of Western and Gulf media were saying this is a popular revolution against a dictator, blah, blah, blah. In reality, it wasn't. It was armed from the West from the very beginning. But yet, mainstream media, lamestream media said for years and years, and they even say now, they refer to the armed terrorist
Hmm.
groups, which include Al Qaeda, as rebels. And it wasn't that at all. And they committed horrible crimes from the very beginning. So in 2014, it was still a very hard time to be in Syria. The terrorist factions outside of Damascus and Aleppo were shelling the cities. So I was writing about that a lot. By that point, I was pretty conversational in Arabic. So I was doing my utmost just to talk with people and get their voices out. Like, what do they want? What do they experience? What was life like
Hmm.
before 2011? Which most people would say it was paradise. We were doing so well. Our country was going upwards. It was very safe. They always emphasized the safety aspect.
Yep.
Anyway, and so I kept reporting from Syria until 2021. And during that time, obviously events in Maidan started. And I was aware, I wasn't paying deep attention, but I was aware.
Hmm.
So in 2019, I finally went to the Donbas for my first time in September. And I spent a few weeks there. I went to Gorlivka, Yasinovatia, other areas, and didn't speak any Russian, obviously. So it was difficult, but I had somebody from the region helping with translation. And then fast forward to 2021, I decided to move here because, frankly, I was sick of the West. I was sick of the policy of the West. Every time I would go back, I was acutely aware both Canada and America, I'm from both countries, are supporting the terrorism in all the
Hmm.
places I've been reporting
Yeah.
from, including Venezuela as well. And yet you go back home, and I'm sure you experienced this as well, and you're met with people citing Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International or New York Times as supposed evidence of the crimes that the US has made into enemies are committing, when in fact, of course, it all emanates from the West. So I got sick of that. I got sick of that. I got sick of the perversions of the West. And I had visited here, Russia, in 2019, went to Crimea then as well. And I liked it. I thought this is a beautiful country. The climate is very similar to Canada, so I'll be very comfortable here. But the people are just like, from the little 2 months I'd spent here in 2019, I thought like I could live here. And so I moved here in 2021, very happily. I spent the first year quite far south of Moscow, kind of in isolation, just enjoying the nature of Russia south of Moscow. Got my dogs. And then in 2022, the SMO, the Special Military Operations, started. So I went back to Donbass, and I spent a lot of that year. I'd spend a few weeks there, come back to my dogs, go back, come
Hmm.
back, back and forth. Туда и обратно.
Hmm.
And as a consequence, as you know, 2022 was a very hard year in
Yeah.
Donbass. And so I was there during some of the more critical times of Ukrainian war crimes, from the bombing of Yelenovka detention facility. That was a crime against Ukrainians
Hmm.
themselves,
Yeah. Yeah.
to all the shelling mostly with NATO weapons of Donetsk and Gorlivka and around, to the use of the Lepidstock mines. I was there in late July when Ukraine fired the rockets containing these mines, and so I documented that, and I continued to follow up on that. So as a consequence of being there in 2022, I mean, of course, there are many other journalists, primarily, of course, Russian and local journalists, but many foreign journalists went there as well, not from corporate media. But for myself, as a consequence of being there during that very hard time, I can speak in complete honesty about the war crimes I've seen committed by Ukraine and NATO, which is, as we, back to the current present time, is very relevant because, according to Western corporate media, everything started in February
Yeah.
2022,
Yeah.
and they totally omit the 8 years prior to that. And so I had that experience in 2019 and then throughout 2022. And so it's been a good counter. I've tried at least my best to counter the lies of Western
Hmm.
media, including the crazy. I mean, you as a military man can can laugh at this and detail for folks why this is absolutely absurd. But the crazy accusations that Russia was bombing itself in Donetsk or
Oh,
Gorlivka
well,
or
it
wherever
wasn't
else,
Russia.
and that Russia
It
was
was
firing
worse.
the
It was worse. It wasn't Russia was bombing itself. It was the rebels were bombing their own children in their own hospital, in their
yes.
own schools.
Yeah, you're correct. That was his. And but like, I'm not a military person. I spent a lot of time around bombs, but you eventually know, like, okay, you know where it's coming from.
Oh
And
yeah.
locals sure as hell know where it's coming from. And then you have the experts who are able to look at the remnants of whatever munition is and the impact point and all that, and say, like, this is the distance it flew, this is where it came from. And that's like, and the Western media would take, you remember in March 2022, March might have been 14th,
Hmm.
Ukraine fired a Tutchka-U
Oh yeah.
onto the center of Donetsk and killed 21 people.
How
And
about when
Western
they
media,
fired a Tochka U try to disguise as Iskandar into Kramatorsk, their own city, and killed a bunch of
mm,
people that were waiting for buses to evacuate, and then trying to
yeah,
blame Russia on that.
yeah. And then, like with regard to Donetsk, the Western media used photos of Donetsk civilians grieving at the scene and said, "Oh, this is they claimed it was a Ukrainian city under Russian
Oh
bombing."
yeah, yeah.
Just
I
outrageous. And actually, there was a delegation, a Ministry of Defense delegation I joined in March 2022. We just spent 2 days both in Lugansk and Donetsk. But we went to Volnovakha, and that hospital there was badly
hmm
damaged by Ukrainian shelling. And the chief physician of that hospital said explicitly the hospital had been occupied by Ukrainian forces and they refused to leave and they mined the ICU before leaving. And so two French media, prime television media, didn't include any of that. They didn't include anything else we'd heard throughout the 2 days in Lugansk and Donetsk. And they just said, oh, the doctor doesn't know what the cause of the shelling is,
Oh
the
yeah.
bombing is, and this is all just a facade that Russia wants to show us.
Oh well, and the Western inspectors at the nuclear power plant in um, Zaporozhye, they also don't know where the rounds are coming from as they're coming on top of their own heads.
Yeah,
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah, they're just somebody. They're just raining rounds. You know, you
yeah.
know. I when I talked to you before on your show for your show, I told you I was in Bosnia, and that's when I really started realizing by talking to the locals how much crap we were being fed. But you remember the final straw that broke the camel's back for the Americans was when with drunken Serbs up in the mountains artilleried a line of civilians waiting for bread somewhere in the city.
No, I don't actually remember that.
Well, there was this moment. So I was in Sarajevo, and I went to that street, right? So they hadn't replaced the asphalt, and I'd been told by people around there that a two trucks full of Serbian civilians were brought in. And the thing is, by the way, the Canadians were observers in the city and with the Serbs, and they called, and actually it came out in the news. They called, and the Canadian observer that was sitting with the Serbs, and now they're all drunk. They got drunk last night. Everybody's just laying around. Nobody fired anything. Plus, even a 120 millimeter mine or mortar round from a hill hitting a specific alley in a built up area on a blind spot because you really couldn't see the people there trying to target something like that in a built up major city with a mortar round. Impossible. But when I went there, to what you're saying, the crater was absolutely round. Ballistics, basic ballistics. If it's coming in at an angle, it's going to have a
Hmm.
splashback in the opposite direction. If it's absolutely
Yeah,
round, that means somebody was standing on a roof and just, well, where's the camera? What? And drops it. And it goes
yeah,
straight down and has almost a perfectly round crater. So they put
yeah,
the Serbs out there, they dropped a mine on them, and they won the Western sympathy. By
yeah,
the way, just like the White Helmets were doing.
yeah. Oh, yeah. There's all sorts of staged events in Syria, even prior to the formation of the White Helmets, which was
Hmm.
like in late 2014, early 2015 or
Hmm.
so. But yeah, there were stage events in 2012 where they like, have you heard of the German, well, he's no longer alive, but the German, he was a journalist, Udo, I always forget his last name, Utkov or something like that. And he was
The one
with
that
like,
wrote a book that told about how the CIA owns the media and said they're probably going to kill me. And then, as a healthy young man in with his late 30s, early 40s, he drops dead from a mysterious heart attack. That guy?
yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
So I had heard, I think first I heard an interview on RT, and then later I came across some article. I don't remember the source, but he was talking about his first journalistic expedition, and it might have been in Iraq. I don't remember, but he was like, new to the game, and like he said something to the effect like all the other journalists were carrying jerry cans full of gas, right? And he's like, "Oh, that's a good idea because we're going far away, and if our car breaks down,
Hmm.
well, then we won't, we'll have petrol. We can keep moving." That's not what the purpose of the gas was for. They went out somewhere where there's nothing happening, lit a fire, and did their war reports, screaming, and that's according to his article. But the same kind of things happened in Syria, seriously. And then, of course, they blamed it on the Assad government. So it's like
There,
it's completely unethical. I could never even imagine being around that scenario and participating. But actually, and if I may, um, when was it
that's
in
horrible. Jeez.
2023? I think when I
Uh-huh.
went back to Donetsk and I met up with, you should have her on your show. You maybe know Christelle Niance. She's based in
No, no,
Donetsk.
I
She's a
don't.
French Russian now journalist, and she's
Hmm.
been reporting from there since I want to say 2016.
Oh,
Anyway,
wow.
she and I met up. We went to interview people from Artyomovsk or Bakhmut.
Hmm.
Um, in April, I think it was 2023, they'd just been evacuated, and they were talking about, what do they call it? The White Angels,
Ah, yeah, yeah.
Ukrainian military
Children,
police that were going
children
and looking
kidnappers.
for children, hunting
Hmm.
children, not look hunting. They had their names and
Hmm.
age and specifics, and the parents were like hiding them in basements. But one of the guys that we spoke to, Sergey something, he said, along the line of foreign journalists participating in war theater, he said like the Ukrainian forces would shell our buildings. We'd hear foreign voices, foreign journalists' voices, and they'd shell the building. And then the foreign journalists would have something to write about, and they'd blame Russia, of course. And he said, like, Russia was nowhere near.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, color me shocked. There was even a picture somebody took. I think it was a CBS or an NBC or MSNBC reporter. He's lying in a ditch. This big, plump guy reporting on how they're getting hit, and behind him is standing a woman with two packages, looking at him like, "What the hell?" It's just a perfect photo. And they turned out to be there like 50, 60 kilometers behind the border. Yeah, I mean, behind the front lines. Yeah, that's
That's so
just
funny. Well,
yeah.
do you remember in Syria during, was it in 2018? So, in 2018, they
Hmm.
alleged the Syrian government had used chemical weapons in
Oh,
eastern Ghouta
yeah.
and Douma. I think it was that attack. I think it was that alleged attack. Anyway, Clarissa Ward, who was a famous Al Qaeda propagandist journalist
Hmm.
in Syria, she, I'm pretty sure it was her. I don't want to, I hope I'm not mixing it up. I'm pretty sure it was she that was seen sniffing a backpack to determine whether there's a chemical weapon. I
Well,
mean, it was
well,
hilarious.
yeah, the White Angels were helping people who are supposedly been dosed with. Okay, it's one thing if it's nerve agent. Nerve agent actually breaks down in oxygen relatively quickly and becomes benign. But if it's anything else like chloride gas or mustard gas or any of these other gases, yeah, they stay pretty damn active until they're diluted with water to the point where they're 1 part per million, and they're without even gloves on. They're just cleaning people, doing all this stuff. Like, yeah,
I mean,
okay.
I went to that medical point. It was about 3 weeks after the
Uh-huh.
alleged attack, and I talked to a young medical student there. And he said he described the scene. He's like, doctors were treating normal dust inhalation and bomb-related attacks. People had been staying in basements, so they were coming
Hmm.
in with all sorts of related injuries or difficulties. And then foreigners, not from the region, came in screaming in Arabic, chemical, kamawi, kamawi. And people didn't know what to do, and someone grabbed a hose and started hosing down this kid. The kid, by the way, later told RT, of course, this was discredited because it was
Hmm.
told to RT that he had been given dates or something like that, sweets, to allow them to hose him down. He was totally fine. And he was one of like 18 or so Syrians that went to testify at The Hague, I think, that there
Hmm.
hadn't been a chemical attack, and they were totally discredited, that nobody believed them, of course.
Oh yeah, the
But anyway, the
U.S.
interesting
walked
thing,
away from that. By the way, the U.S. representative walked out, and the English on it too.
and so when I was at that chemical point, like, and I filmed, it was the same room with the same
Hmm.
orange, like, whatever, benches, and you could tell it was the same room. And I asked the guy, like, aside from, please tell me what happened, I said, by the way, were any of the doctors wearing protective gear? He's like, no. I said, were any of them sick? He said, no. I'm like, all right. Like, you'd think that would be a thing if there had been an attack. And then I walked around the Duma, the area, and I talked with people, and none, like, they're all just like, "What are you talking about? What chemical attack?" And they're like,
Yeah.
"We want to tell you that the ruling faction there, the main one, at least in Duma, was Jaish al-Islam." And they were like,
Hmm.
"We want to tell you how our life was under Jaish al-Islam. They were executing people in the streets. They were starving us. They had control of all the food sources. They wouldn't let us farm. They shot all their livestock before they left." Like it, and these are the horror stories, by the way, you would hear every time an area was liberated. Like in uh, December 2016, Eastern Aleppo was
Hmm.
liberated. I had been there in November, and I was back actually in the States giving lectures. And so I saw how Western media was portraying it. A TV was on somewhere, and they're like, Aleppo has fallen. I'm like, Aleppo is literally occupied by Al Qaeda and other factions that
Yeah.
were beheading, sniping, and shelling and killed 11,000 civilians before Aleppo was liberated, not army, civilians. And now the area, like, women like me can walk without fear of being abducted or taken as a sex slave, or people just they can walk without being sniped. And that's falling. Like the lexicon was so disgusting. But
Oh,
reports after that, that journalists that
evil.
went to Eastern Aleppo were like, they talked to people, and it was the same scenario. Eastern Aleppo, Ghouta, Homs, other areas, Madaya. every area. There was food. The government actually had sent
Hmm.
food in. UN agencies, the government had facilitated, and then when the Russians became involved, they were also active in enabling humanitarian corridors, the entrance of food, the exit of civilians. And in every case, the people inside would say, "Well, we couldn't get the food because the terrorists were hoarding it." And if they would give it to us, we had to buy it for like we had to sell a car to get, a bag of rice or something ridiculous. Like
Come on,
that's
come
what was
on.
going on.
The people wanted their 12-year-old, 11-year-old daughters to be used as sex slaves by maniacs from other countries. They were asking for it. I mean, they were begging for it. That's why they were enlightened by Islamic Jihad that was sitting there and the other organization funded by America and
There
NATO.
you go. Funded by America. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is American democracy in
Oh yeah,
action.
yeah. Well, there's this interesting little point. Under George Bush Jr., there was a report that came out on CIA black prisons that were also located, by the way, in Poland, in I think Slovakia, a couple other European countries, and they were also located in Syria. So they had no problem with the Syrian government up to the
Yeah.
point where the Syrian government, and these are CIA run black prisons, they would bring people in there, do whatever they wanted to, make them disappear. This is CIA basically renting land out or facilities out from these countries, including Poland. Let's not forget that.
Interesting.
Um, and the moment, the breaking point that the people had enough of of Assad was when he said no to the United Arab Emirates pipeline, gas pipeline, said yes to the Iranian one.
Yeah.
Yep, and that
He
was,
also resisted IMF funding, as I
oh
recall.
yeah, yeah,
Syria had its own banking system.
yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, prior to that, the Assad government was actually in favor in the West.
oh yeah,
They weren't demonized. And
nope,
if you remember, Vogue had done a profile on the First Lady, Asma Assad, and it was called a Rose in the Desert, which something like that. She actually didn't like that title because she's a pretty down to earth lady, and she was
yeah,
just like,
yeah,
I'm not any better than other Syrian women. But in any case, it was a pretty fair article about her, a
mm-hmm,
very long, detailed, in-depth article. The author spending, I think, several days with her talking about her charitable work in Syria. All this, like, so there was that, and then as soon as the orchestrated events started in February, March
mm-hmm,
2011, boom, everything changed. Suddenly,
yep,
he's the worst person on earth, just like happened then with President Putin. I mean, he's been
mm-hmm,
vilified for a very long time, but it's the same. It's the same cartoonish demonization of the person that you need to get rid of. So you need to vilify them in every way possible. They're the worst person. They're allegedly responsible for the worst atrocities in human history, right? And then
yep,
you have all these caricatures, these cartoons, these ridiculous things to make the Western public be like, oh yeah, he's awful. People absorb this stuff. They don't
yeah,
even know. Like even if people who are apolitical and probably don't even follow the news, they'll absorb this stuff and
oh
they'll
yeah, yeah,
spew it
yeah.
out.
Well,
And so it's very effective.
look at Zelensky. Mr. Churchill of our times or Mr. Lincoln of our times. But you're right, Lincoln was a tyrant from hell. If you actually read who Lincoln was. But okay, it's a whole separate show. But the super white and fluffy hero of our time suddenly becomes the evil guy because and the protests come up because he went against the American organizations. I mean, he is corrupt as hell, but so also, but the moment he said, okay, he's back to being Mr. Fluffy and being the great defender of democracy, the
Yeah.
dictator that canceled elections and shot his opponents. I mean, that was just what, a month ago, right?
And yet the West took issue with the referendum in the Oblast and Donbas. And I was in Donetsk at the time. Actually, I was there, and at the time, people didn't. At least I didn't know it was going to happen in September. I was just
Hmm.
there, and so it happened. And so for the 5 days of that referendum, I was going around Donetsk, Makivka, Gorlivka, Mariupol again, and talking to people. And like in Donetsk, I was in Kivsky, which is a very
Hmm.
hard hit region, as you know, and met a group of women who were going door to door. So, because you know how the narrative was portrayed after, oh, forced at gunpoint to vote. And it's like these women were actually risking their lives going in a very hard hit district of northern
Hmm.
Donetsk, going door to door to allow people to vote if they wanted to. They weren't forcing them. They're like, here we are, show us your documents. You can vote if you want to. And otherwise, like I just like I remember being in, I think it was Makivka, and I said that the voting station was actually outside. Most of the time was in an apartment
Hmm.
somewhere. The last day was in schools. And this particular occasion, for whatever reason, they had to set up a table outside. And so there's like a few women sitting at the table. Residents of the apartment would come out, and there was like a local, I think he must have been a Donbas soldier in the
Hmm.
distance. And like, so, Western media would say, oh, look at that soldier. He's forcing people to vote. And at one point, you see this babushka pushing her little grandchild to go take a piece of candy from the soldier. I actually got that on video. I'm like,
He
look at
actually
the body
bribed them
language.
to
Like,
vote there with a piece of candy.
yeah.
You missed that. Yeah,
I'm a bad journalist. I just showed the complicity of this bribery
yeah,
operation.
you know what the point, no, I want to correct you a little bit on this. They didn't have a problem with the referendum. They had a problem with the outcome of the referendum. If the referendum had said no, that would have been
Oh,
the
right.
best referendum that ever happened in human history. Just like the elections in Romania. By the way, Grigorescu apparently didn't have any support from Russia. That's the news now. But okay, yeah, the elections are over. We put the candidate we wanted on the throne. So, okay, so, and what are you going to do about it?
I mean, most people I talk to are like, we've been waiting. What did they say? We've been waiting 8 years for this election. Like they've been wanting this election.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think in all honesty, bearing in mind that in 2022 my Russian is limited. I mean, I'm still not prepared to do an interview with you in Russian, but my comprehension is much better now, and I can, get by day to day with my terrible grammar Russian. But so I'll put that caveat out there, and I don't claim to have spoken to every person in Donetsk or around, but in all the encounters I had, I can think of only one encounter, and I was very startled. This woman who was very anti-Russian
Hmm.
in a supermarket I ran into, and she would be like the type of person that would be featured in Western media, but
Oh,
that's
yeah.
literally the only encounter I've had. Everybody else is like either maybe some of the youths I met were
Hmm.
some, not all, some maybe were ambivalent. Others were very supportive of the SMO of Russia. Live our lives. That was the
Yeah.
overriding thing I would hear over and over again. So
Yeah.
of course they vote for something, whether it's ideological or they just think like if we become a part of Russia, then we'll have the safety, we'll be protected by Russia.
Mhm. Yeah,
Because nobody, the West isn't going to protect them. The OSCE didn't protect them. The UN didn't protect them.
yeah, yeah. Getting shelled by the Ukrainians really lets you know who you are if you're, quote, on Ukrainian land, as they're
Yeah,
shelling and killing you and your neighbors. Yeah,
yeah,
that tends to focus the mind quite a bit.
yeah.
Yeah. I've got an aunt. Well, in English, I guess it'd be a great aunt. In Russian, it's двоюродная бабушка, so second grandmother. Uh, She's in Yasanavata. My second
Oh,
grandfather. He died of cancer because they couldn't get him to the clinic to have his checkups and treatments because that was in Gorlovka, and Ukrainian drones are hitting whatever moves. I've
yeah.
been up and down those roads. You hear the artillery falling behind you, but it's the drones you got to worry about because they go 200 kilometers an hour when they're zooming in. Not very far. They don't have the get go to go very far like that, but if you happen to be within that range, so and they prefer military, of course, but if they can't find military, anything else will do just as well. So,
Yeah.
she's spent 12 years under, it's almost 13 years under shelling. So,
In Yasinavata or in
y-
Gorlovka?
in Yasanavata.
Okay.
That's the front line.
Yeah. I mean, when I went there in 2019, I didn't know the geography, so I actually had
Hmm.
somebody from um the press office. He's also a war correspondent,
Hmm.
really Dmitry Astrakhan. He's a really good journalist. He very kindly came with me and showed me around and translated for me. And we went to a part of Yasinavata, but it was like the village was beyond. It was in beyond the sniper lane.
Hmm.
And I remember I met this man who said, he wouldn't. Most people wouldn't be interviewed on camera. Oh, my internet connection. Do you still have me?
Yeah, yeah, I still got you. I got you.
Okay, it flashed. Most people didn't want to be well, many people didn't want to in Gorlivka and around there, Zaitsevo, because they feared being bombed because they'd appeared. They thought I was big
Yeah,
media. So
yeah.
they wouldn't have, nobody would have seen them. But anyway, I understood their fear. But this one man agreed to at least talk to me, but he didn't want to be filmed. And he was walking down this, obviously no body armor or anything. He was walking down this lane. He said he'd been sniped by the Ukrainian army before in the leg, and this is the only way to get to his home. And like again, many people didn't want to leave their homes because where are they going to go? This is where they
Right,
they
right.
live. They have nowhere else to go. So they were living in horrible conditions,
Yeah.
2019 and obviously before. So that was my first memory of that district. So yeah, my sympathies to your relative.
No, then yeah,
And in
still only
Gorlovka
get.
now, like
Mhm.
I keep reading about the Ukrainian forces targeting ambulances with drones
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
And in 2022, they were targeting with shelling. And this is a very sadistic tactic
Hmm.
that the Israelis use as well. They wait until an ambulance or whatever
Hmm.
emergency services have been dispatched to help people who've been
Hmm.
injured by their first shelling or the second shelling. And then they wait till the medics or rescuers are
Yep.
there and then they shell
Uh,
again. And obviously this is
I'm sorry to
criminally.
interrupt. We're almost out of time. We've got like 30 seconds left. Uh,
Oh, wow.
and there's so much more to talk about. I know. I'm gonna get you back on. Everybody, thank you. Thank you for
Okay.
joining the call, or the podcast. Yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast. If you have comments, leave them in the comments section, and I'll make sure that Eva sees them so she can answer you. Thank you very much. Uh, where can
Okay.
they find your work while we have some time?
My Telegram channel is probably the best. It's